Good morning and welcome. I'd like to say congratulations, you made a good choice this morning. You're joining the webinar for how to evaluate performance in a challenging economy with myself, Mark Sheldon, and Zoe Williams from Luminary Mindset. Just a couple of housekeeping things to start with. Firstly, this webinar is being recorded. You will receive a copy of the presentation or copy of the video to your own email addresses following the webinar. If you'd like to ask questions, please use the question box in the software. We will look to answer each question during the different sections in the presentation. And equally, if you would like to have your own video turned on to interact with Zoe or myself during that question, please indicate that in the question box when you submit. Finally, on that basis, we're providing the webinar free of service. We ask for attendees to make a donation to a nominated charity, which is Boycott Your Bed on behalf of Action for Children. This is Savant's nominated charity. We've been working with Action for Children for many years now, probably 6 or 7 years. And obviously Action for Children prevents youth homelessness and supports family welfare, which is obviously very relevant at times like this within the current economy. Now, that's something that we'll send out the link to you in due course. Feel free to donate, and everything's much appreciated on behalf of the charity. But before we kick on to the actual presentation, I just want to sort of, I suppose, position ourselves. Some of you remember that we started this series of seminars and webinars back in 2019, and it's evolved, as we've all had to do during that period of time. We've now got a quarterly basis of events, and when I look back from my notes then, the old norm, if you go back to COVID, has now become, was lost, and we created a new norm. And here we are in a very interesting time in that the change curve, we've ridden it, we've survived it. Some of us very much feel like we're back on the change curve again with an economic situation. So if you look back last quarter of 2022, it was probably headlines you would have said were doom and gloom in the economic outlook. GDP was stagnant, rampant inflation. Where can this possibly lead to other than a recession and a crash? Hopefully a V-shaped crash, but a crash for the economy in 2023. Well, I see this slightly differently for 2023. I see it from a different perspective. We've always performed well in changing times, and that's a collective we. I can talk about the Savant business. We actually did the same amount of business in 2020, the COVID years, we've done the prior year, not without a lot of hard work, but we thought about things, we developed things, we changed our model, we adapted. I think the market is offering that to us now. We've got so many more tools than we had before to adapt and pivot and deliver what our customers actually want. I think we also need to maintain a medium-term perspective. I mean, historically, the marketplace has only ever dropped for a short period of time. So let's say 1 year out of 5. The other 4 years have all been positive. And if you look at the growth curve over that 5-year period, there's been continuous growth for this economy and for your businesses. So maintaining growth over 5 years has got to be within our grasp and got to be our perspective. Even if the economy does have a blip, we then need to hold a nerve. Someone once said, keep calm and carry on. Planning, process, and discipline, all key phrases that we've grown up with, but they are very, very relevant. Optimism matters, right? That's a phrase that people in my business know too well. They might get a bit bored of me saying it, but optimism matters. Always remember, the maximum downside is 100%, but the upside is unlimited, okay? It's impossible to limit on your aspirations. So we need to get that perspective right. Obviously, we need to lean on the side of optimism. The best businesses identify how they can grow, how can they focus on their people, the culture, and how they can gain competitive advantage in what is always a strong marketplace if you've got the right services and products. So perspective really does matter when you're delivering elevated performance, as we're talking about today. So when you get one final thought for me is look back at what you've achieved. Look back, as I'm doing now with Savant, what we've achieved over the last 3 or 4 years. I think you should take a huge satisfaction for it, but also realize how much you've changed and what the huge opportunities in front of you to change and grow the next 2 years. So keep your vision. My question to all of us while we're looking at this is, keep the vision, and where will you be in 2 years' time? So whenever things get thrown at us, that's just the past, and we move on. Okay. So hopefully on that positive note, I'll hand over to my colleague Zoe, and I'll let her tell us how we're all going to deliver.
Thanks, Mark. Excellent introduction. Gosh, this is a world away from when we started doing these seminars back in the Shard, isn't it? When there was a maximum of 20 people in the room with us. So Mark and I have been doing these for a long time, over 5 years. And what we're going to talk to you about today is how to elevate your performance in the challenging economy that Mark has just referenced. And one of the things that I'm going to share with you, which is most important to me to share with as many people as possible, which is why it's so wonderful that so many of you registered to come to this event today, are some really simple leadership performance uplift tools that we use at Luminary Mindset with all of our client base across the world, that you can start to apply for yourself as a leader, and also start to apply with your teams across your organisation to try and help alleviate some of the challenges that you might be experiencing personally, or that you might be experiencing as a team or an organisation. So as the slide that you can see in front of you now is showing the kind of the journey that I'm going to take you on. So we're going to look at current leadership challenges to start off with, the impact that this has on performance, the impact on decision making, and then some solutions that I'm going to share with you to try out with your teams. We've also got an amazing team that Mark's brought on board to help us run this webinar. So in case you hear me saying Vinay's in the background, and he's going to be controlling the slide deck for me. And we've also got Elisiana, who's also been supporting us. So I just want to reference them as well, because they have contributed a huge amount to the success of this webinar being set up. So next slide, Vinay, thank you. So we're going to start by talking about some of the current challenges for leaders. And Mark reached out to some of you, and thank you to those of you that came back to Mark sharing some of the experiences that you're currently having. As you may have seen in the intro video, I'm based in Perth in Australia and Mark's based in London. So we've got a global perspective at the moment, but we're really going to try and speak to specifically what Mark's hearing from his client base. And then I'm going to bring in some examples from my client base as well later on in the presentation. So at the moment, some of the themes that came through the feedback that we received: increased mental load. Those are my words. I call it mental load. It's when people, their thoughts are very much consuming time and space in their day and in their productivity. And that's being caused, what you're telling us, that's being caused by multiple priorities and projects. So there's a lot going on right now, lots of change, lots of priorities, activity probably to try and generate productivity, to try and generate resourcefulness. Mark shared with me that you're in a period of time in the UK of stagnation or stability. We'll talk about a little bit about that more later on, but you're really trying to generate something. You're trying to generate activity and energy across your organisation to create some outcomes, and that can increase mental load. You also told us that you're having challenges managing boundaries, or your team are having challenges managing boundaries. Now, when we have an increase in priorities, we have to learn to say no. We have to prioritise and then be able to say no, and that causes us sometimes some internal discomfort, sometimes not, depending on your leadership style. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about how to overcome that internal discomfort and how to prioritize and effectively communicate no and boundaries in a better way. Managing uncertainty. Now, the change curve that Mark referenced, the Kubler-Ross change curve, that's coming up in the content today. How do different people respond to change? And we all respond to change differently. Some people have got very high resilience for change. Some people actually prefer changing environments, so they have a preference for change. And some people absolutely hate it and just want to run away from any change. So we'll talk about that and how that impacts on productivity and relationships. And then finally, doing more with less. You've said that you're desperately trying to figure out ways to get more productivity out of your teams with less resources, less time, less money, less budget, less people. So we'll talk about that as well. Now, one of the things that I'm really, really keen to encourage you to do is to interact with us. I am I hate talking to myself, and thankfully Mark's here, so I'm talking to him, but I know that there are people out there that I'm talking to, and I'd love to hear from you. So at any point in the presentation, please, in the chat box, put questions, reference in your question if you would like to come on camera. We can do that. Give us a bit of time to do that if you do ask for that. And Mark's going to be monitoring the questions box, and he's going to occasionally say, Zoe, we've got a question on that, and we'll answer your questions live. I've been to a number of these myself, and just listening to someone talk, I find less stimulating than interaction, and certainly I don't want to just be talking for 45 minutes. So that would be great. Thank you so much. Next slide, Vinay, please. These are some of the direct comments that some of you made in your feedback to Mark, and it's really what really resonated with me when I read the feedback on current challenges was the emotion in the language that you've used. So there's real kind of words such as, you can see there, causes stress, trigger points, We're seeking for support around mental health, balancing execs having to balance effectively a puzzle of how to be supportive and drive the growth at the same time. And these are all very humanistic words, okay? We're not talking about processes and systems, we're talking about people, we're talking about the human aspect of leadership and change and uncertainty. So it's really timely for us to set up this webinar, and I'm seeing globally with all of our clients a real appetite for this insight and knowledge at this time. It's not good enough anymore for us to just have an employee assistance program that we can, you know, give the phone number to someone across the desk and say, here, go and get some support there. I'm noticing that leaders are really having to step into leading in a more humanistic way through care and support, but also who's looking after the leader as well, and how to develop your own resilience and how to maintain yourself when you're trying to support and encourage others. So those are some of the specific bits of feedback that we got from you, which, like I said, it's very humanistic, what we're dealing with right now. Thanks, Vinay. The next slide. Mark, have we had anything come through that you need me to reference in the chat box?
Nothing at the moment. What we'll do now, let's launch the poll, the first poll.
Yes.
And let's get people interacting with that. So let's keep, you know, let's wake you all up. You've got your coffees. First question. Okay. In which areas do you find your key challenges as a leader? Please complete the poll.
Now, this is as much for us as it is for everyone participating, because it'll be really interesting to see the spread of challenges that you're currently experiencing. And we will display the results on the screen once they're through.
Yeah. It's quite even. Or maybe one. I can see them in the background as it totals up, you see. So I get a sneak preview. Okay. Just give it another 5 seconds and then we'll. Okay, I'm going to close the poll now. Can you see that, Zoe?
Right, yes, okay. So 14% overall business performance, 16% individual performance, 27% people and communication, and 43% strategic alignment across the organisation. That's really interesting. For those of you that selected strategic alignment across the organisation, it would be really useful in the chat box to know more about that, and specifically what you might think the root cause of that misalignment, I guess, is what you're experiencing. From my experience working with organisations that don't have strategic alignment, that's usually to do with volume of work, and that's usually to do with competing priorities and communication, which might link to, if you could have selected two, you might have selected strategic alignment and people and communication there. So that's really fascinating to see that spread, actually, and that's one of the biggest challenges that we have as organisations, is the spread of challenges. And how do you deal with all of these challenges quickly and efficiently? And I'm hoping that the tools that I'm going to give you today are going to impact on all of those 4 areas. So that's one of the reasons for creating the poll, was to see which area you might specifically need most support in. And we're going to help you with all. So thank you very much. So next slide.
Insightful.
Pardon?
Very insightful, yes.
Yes, really interesting. Thank you. So next slide, Vinay, the change curve. So some of you that have been to our webinars before will have seen this before. Some of you may have seen it on other webinars or have experience of this Kubler-Ross change curve. It was actually developed to help people understand grief after losing a loved one. But actually it's loss. We can experience loss over anything in life when something ends. It's when something comes to an end or something transforms from one state to another, which also results in the end of the previous state. So I use this change curve to talk to leaders about the experience that some of their individuals and teams might be having when being put through a change process, which is a formal change process. So you might have a formal transformational change strategy going on at the moment, but also minor changes such as, well, minor, I don't want to sort of minimize, but smaller, less organizational wide changes, such as a change in team. So a team member coming or going, a change in rotation of teams, a change in the way that you're working, even a subtle change to the way that you're working, for some people can cause them, depending on where they're at in their life and how the world is occurring to them at that time, can destabilize. This destabilization isn't always visible. We'll talk about that later, what's visible and what's underneath the surface. But it's a really useful tool just to bear in mind when you're talking to your teams about any change, anything to do with change. You don't necessarily need to use this language or the tool itself. It's something to maybe carry within you and just elevate your awareness. When they're talking about what's about to happen, listen for anything that might indicate shock, anything that might indicate denial. The reason for listening for this is you can then maybe have a one-to-one with individuals and ask them, how is this change occurring to you? And I've got a specific conversation structure that I'm going to share with you later to take your teams through how the world is occurring to them. The reason it's so important for you to tune into what people are experiencing is how they're feeling about what's happening around them will impact on their decision making. It will impact on the thoughts that they have. It will impact on their judgment and how they're perceiving what's going on around them, and that will then impact on what they say to each other, which again later we will talk about groupthink and culture, performance culture, which is caused by the conversations and the collective behavior of teams and organizations. So this, for me, this change curve is really one of the source tools that we implement across all of our client interactions, to say to leaders, have this as one of your tools in your toolkit. Have this as something that you're listening for, and be careful, like don't obviously, no assumptions. We don't want to go into a one-to-one conversation and tell someone that we think that they're in depression, but just listen for it and be mindful of where people are at on this curve. Anything to add from your perspective, Mark?
No, I think it'd be interesting if we use the poll to let's see where people, if they've got change going on in the organisation, where they are in that process. Yeah,
let's do that. Yeah, we can then talk about that. Thank you.
So I'm just going to launch a poll, which is just going to ask you to, where does your team seem to be? Okay, where seem to be become stuck on the change curve?
Yeah, so that's this question. So people can get stuck, teams can get stuck. And again, it goes back to that group think. When a leader presents a team with a change or a new way of doing something, the team will generally go off and talk about it amongst themselves, either collectively or in subgroups, to try and figure out whether other people are feeling the same way as them about it. And then you get a collective team perception of the change. And sometimes they can get stuck there. And if they get stuck, that's what resistance to change, right? That's when we experience resistance to change. Bargaining is when they try and negotiate with you, or either explicitly or passively. Normally, people are passive in their bargaining, so they'll just try and get around the change, not interact with it or engage with it, not show up for the meetings, you know, that kind of thing. And depression is that full withdrawal. It's that full withdrawal from whatever's going on around them to try and protect themselves. And then, of course, acceptance and problem solving is where people come out of the cycle and move forward. It'd be really interesting to see where people are observing their teams on this change curve.
Okay, I'm going to leave it running for another 5 seconds, 10 seconds. So just please do complete this poll.
We have to set it up so I can see the results in the future. The suspense.
Okay.
Got a phone.
That's better. We're getting there now. Okay, right. So I'll close the poll now.
Great. Oh, look, yes. Interesting. Now that's interesting. So we've got bargaining and we've got acceptance and problem solving as the top two, which is good. That's good that a lot of you have got a lot of teams who are into acceptance and problems. That shows high resilience. That also shows that you might have people who have experienced a significant amount of change in their lives in the past, and they've built up that muscle to move through the curve. And the bargaining is probably, like, that's why I went to that one to explain it first. That's probably the most challenging to navigate when someone's in that position of bargaining. Shock and denial, anger and depression, those are definitely cases where one-to-ones, and again, some of the tools that I'm going to give you, the tools are really powerful to help support people who are there. I wouldn't recommend trying to move them when people are in shock, denial, anger or depression. Trying to move someone in that state is probably counterproductive. It's how to support them and give them the time and space that they need to move themselves through that phase. But bargaining, acceptance and problem solving, that's great. Excellent, thank you. Around 86% of us have a need for certainty. It's just the way that we're wired, it's the way that our brain works. The other 14%, of which I'm one, which causes me to have a rather different life, is variety. If you're not seeking for certainty, you're seeking for variety. And people who seek for variety always look for newness, they look for change, they create change, they cause it. But 86% of people apparently surveyed seek for certainty. So when change occurs, there's this emotional response that we're going to look at in more detail in a second. And emotional intelligence is the ability, it's that emotional muscle to notice in oneself, oh, okay, I'm currently in anger and I, recognize that I'm angry about this, but I'm not going to stay stuck here. I'm going to reconcile whatever it is that I'm angry about to move through the change curve to get to that acceptance and problem solving phase. Do we have any questions before I rattle on, Mark?
Yeah, we have. We've got some questions and statements. Some of it relates back to our first poll as well as the second poll. So, so I'm just trying to pull this up. Okay. So in relation to our first poll, now we're working remotely. It can become more challenging. The three polls can be more challenging. So that was one statement. Strategic alignment, especially across private equity firms, is a challenge as leadership camps across the organisation dilute alignment.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a statement from and I work in an organisation where the majority of people work in the ongoing business, but a small number of people can work on the project that can have a big impact on performance. Managing strategic alignment and day-to-day resource allocation is increasingly challenging.
Yes. Yeah, with smaller teams.
The priority of it becomes what's the priority? The day-to-day or the priority of the project, which disrupts the day-to-day running of the business, I'm presuming. Another statement here: there can be multiple change curves going on at the same time, which can make things even more difficult.
Yes, exactly right. Yes.
And again, I think that probably relates back to that alignment.
It does.
And it don't always seem to converge.
No, they don't. And something really important for you to remember as a leader is that you are not responsible for all of this. So if there are multiple change curves occurring across your teams or organisation at once, which there will be, you are responsible for noticing it and having the tools and being able to provide the support through your management team, through the people that work for you. You do not have to be responsible for aligning all of those change curves. It's actually individual responsibility. Like I said, me noticing that I'm in anger at an individual level, the team's taking responsibility for the conversations that they're having and the story that they're creating around the change, and then the leadership team providing people with that self-awareness and the tools to help them through that, so that you actually create a culture of individuals and collective teams being responsible for their response to change, not the leaders. Yeah.
Another statement: the volume of work, especially down the leadership hierarchy, is so large that most people are drowning in a day-to-day work, have no time to make changes to the process or even develop themselves. So that's, and then there's a statement about the leadership doesn't understand that. There is a lack of empathy in this person's perspective, in the view that at that level, at the leadership level, that may not come across all of the organisation. Yeah,
that's true. So empathy is a very strong leadership skill set that should be developed continuously. And empathy is different from sympathy. So it's being able to understand and acknowledge and partially experience someone else's experience. It's not to sympathize with them and put them in a position of less than. But I've also learned in my experience that to empathize too much can create dysfunctional cultures. So you actually want to empathize to be able to connect and then move into compassion and support rather than staying in a space of empathy.
Steve asked, do you think it can be useful to share the KR curve with staff and discuss the results with them?
Yes, absolutely.
Do you think people understand the whole perspective of the curve?
In terms of, sorry, ask me that question again.
So if you show them the whole curve,
yes,
does it seem like it's two-stage managed?
Well, so it's an interesting question because we do this. And everybody, we're going to come on to something called meaning making. Everybody makes meaning out of what's going on around them, and everyone has filters, listening filters and visual filters, based on a number of things, but past experiences normally. So you'll present this to somebody and they'll make meaning of it from their own perspective. They'll judge it. So yes, some people will get it and go, yeah, I've seen it before, I've used it. Other people will go, what's this? They're talking. As a leader, you've got to sometimes put yourself at caution to share something with your teams or with your organization that not everyone's going to buy into. But to uplift performance culture and to help people collectively, you only need, really to transform performance culture, you need less than 50% of the organization to be on board with it. And that means that, more than 50% won't necessarily be on board ever, or at different stages. So if you can help at least 40% of the people that you're trying to influence positively, that will then cause a kind of a tipping point of positive change, and then they will then take that forward for you. So as a leader, only worry about 40% enrollment of 40% of people in something new. Yeah,
I totally think that's a really good perspective. You can't take all the people with you. You're trying to support and give, but it's important everyone understands that they're on at the same point, where has the same information, the same chance to understand and digest. But some people will jump ahead, some will fall behind, and you're trying to take hopefully the majority with you on that journey.
You will eventually, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. But they'll travel at different speeds along that curve. So you've got to, what's the right phrase? Almost understand that and say that that's okay. But as long as they are moving forward, not stuck. Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Okay. So we've got a few more statements, comments. If you want to keep going, or do you want to jump on to the next slide?
Let's keep going through the content, because I suspect that I'll cover off some of them. So next slide, please, Vinay. So really, this is just some questions to ask yourself, your team. How is change currently impacting work, team, the business? What stage of the curve are you experiencing? And do you have examples of the emotions of change impacting on you and your team? Just to start having people share, because one of the most challenging things at the moment I'm experiencing with my client base is that leaders aren't giving their teams the opportunity to actually just share what experience they're having and have that acknowledged. It's not about fixing it or resolving it or solving it. It's just being heard. One of, basic human needs: be seen, be heard, and belong. And having your leader just hear what experience you're having can often relieve a lot of mental load and pressure and stress in here, because it's all in here. Most of it's in here, right, that we're talking about today. It's what's going on in our minds and our bodies that's causing people to feel overwhelmed or increased mental load. So just ask your team. I've also written down here just some other questions. So how much change have I or we experienced in life, just to get an impression of the change resilience that you have in your teams, because some people will have experienced high levels of change in their life and they won't be fazed by it. Other people might say, well, I've just never experienced this before in my life, I feel overwhelmed by it. Has this made me more tolerant or less tolerant of change? And what are my strategies to handle change? Are lovely questions that you can ask at a team meeting, or open a town hall or an all hands or an address to a large number of people, just to get them to self-reflect and just look, okay, we're going through a period of change, we're going through a period of pressure. Just self-reflect and give yourself permission to be feeling whatever it is that you're feeling right now about whatever it is that's going on. Very powerful thing for a leader to do. Okay. Next slide, please, Vinay. So how is performance impacted by these challenges? So multiple ways. I've just summarized a few of the most common here, which I've already referenced. So impact on a personal level. The change curve is only experienced by some, so don't worry if some people just look at you and say, well, no, I'm actually all good. Great, leverage them, ask them to support you in supporting others, because if some people are okay, then they need to be enrolled in the cause of supporting others. Mental load increases. So mental load is that thinking. The brain never stops, right? It's constantly going. So the mental load increases, the thoughts, the ruminations, it's like a pressure cooker. Meaning making increases. We're going to talk about meaning making in a second. Meaning making is my number one, 100% feedback from my clients that tool alleviates a huge amount of performance pressure and gets them out of many situations where performance is dipping or stagnating. So we'll go into meaning making in a second. Anxiety can increase. Stress around job security. We heard from you that some of your teams are increasingly stressed about that. And again, that's occupying space and energy. And a hot market for talent creates more uncertainty and change. So people are going through a lot at a personal level. And then impact on performance culture at an organizational level. open loops, which this is something that it's unanswerable questions. It's what uncertainty causes in our brain. We get open loops where we have a question that we can't answer, and it increases that mental load. We're seeking for certainty, and our brain and body need to know what's going to happen next. So that's how can you alleviate that? And then all of this impacts on decision making, communication, and the interpretation of events around people. So that's just some of the ways in which this challenging economy is impacting on people personally and collectively. Anything to add there, Mark?
No, I think there's, how to put it, symptoms in some cases that we can all recognise in the environments that we've been or we've worked in. I think what it's nice. I think we'll spend some time in a moment talking about how to solve some of those situations or the impact on decision making as well, which I think is really important.
Yes, we will. Absolutely. Okay, so we're going to get into the tool that everyone asks me for, that is very simple. I was amazed when I first started to see the impact of this. So next slide, please, Vinay. So meaning making. Now, events happen around us all the time, and how we judge and perceive those events is different depending on the individual. Now, 100 people can go into a movie theatre and watch the same movie, and all 100 can come out and say they had a different experience or different interpretation of the same movie, right? So we've all got different filters running. And part of your recruitment process or your talent management process probably is or should be, how do we make sure that we invite people into this organisation that are culturally aligned, are the words that I hear. What does that mean? Well, one of the main pieces of cultural alignment that you want to ensure is in place is that people's filters, how they listen to the world and how they view the world, their mental models, are not aligned with each other because we want to increase diversity, but are aligned with achieving the objectives of the organisation. So that's one of the things that we're now starting to design with our clients, is onboarding and introducing people into the organisation. How do we look for the mental models that are going to help us set us up for success and set that individual up for success? So events happen around us. We take the information in through our senses, our 5 senses, and then our brain says, right, I need to make meaning of this. I need to figure out whether it's safe or not, whether I know or don't know, does it increase uncertainty? And it judges. That judgment is the mental load. It causes anxiety if it increases uncertainty. It influences our stress levels. It influences our decision making. So what people make something mean can often be very different from what's actually happening. And as a leader, if you can help people separate, start with yourself first, separate the meaning from the event that's occurring, separate the meaning from the data that you're seeing or perceiving, you can then start to have a completely different conversation with your team and your organization about the meaning that people are putting to what's occurring versus the what's happening. Now, this is an element of emotional intelligence called reality testing. And leaders and organizations that are very powerful and strong in their reality testing improve performance significantly, because people are then dealing with actually what's happening in front of them and what's occurring in reality and aligned around that, not all the different pockets of meaning making and interpretation that can cause people to become misaligned. And group subcultures and teams create their own meaning. They create their own meaning of what's going on, and then they galvanize around it to feel safer. You know, this is what this means, and therefore we're safe. Anything there, Mark, that's come through?
No, I think that's a really good reference point, because I think we see it in our own families, let alone at work at times. And so I think, and what we would think is a positive situation, somebody else's meaning has made it a negative situation, and then people almost cluster around a negative, or can cluster around an opinion or a meaning, whichever language it is, and then it builds a certain momentum when it didn't need to, because they fuel that meaning rather than it, and then the whole thing becomes, hold on, that's not what we said at all. How have we got to that? And we have to take it back and peel it back, saying, no, these are the actual events. This is what it leads to. That's your meaning is not correct. This is what it should be. This is how it should be. But you've got to deconstruct that to be able to do that. That's the only way to do that.
Absolutely correct. And the clients that I've been working with for a number of years now have 2 circles on their walls in their offices, and they'll actually do an exercise partway through a conversation. They'll say, right, stop, break, meaning making, and they'll separate. They'll go, look, we're talking at cross purposes here, and they'll use the 2 circles for people to actually show, this is what I'm making it mean, and then show what's actually happening. Really clean up the conversation, clean it up. Yeah. So next slide, please. The next, we look at what causes people to interpret events differently. So we have consumption habits, our diet, not just our diet, what we consume in terms of media, what we consume in terms of the people around us, the relationships in our life. What we put into our nervous system affects how our nervous system then reacts to the world around us. That in turn impacts on our emotional state, and our nervous, that's the nervous system. That's how we're responding to what's going on around us, which links to the change curve. So all of this links together. It's all very simple, who we are as humans. The human condition is quite a simple formula. Our values and beliefs underpin, they're the mental models that we have in order to test the information that we're receiving against. We test it against our values, we test it against our beliefs. Does this make sense? And the psychology that we have, the psychology that we've been brought up with, the role modeling that we've experienced, and then past experiences, our memories. So all of this combined together causes our meaning-making machine to pump out the judgments and the thoughts that we then use to drive our decision-making, our communication, everything. Everything is formed out of this. Okay.
So we've got a poll. Do you want me to go about the meaning making? Yep.
Please, that would be great to see what people.
Okay. So we're gonna. Do you find meaning making is having an impact on your team's performance? It's a simple concept, but it's really important because I think it is about messaging and communication and other aspects.
Yes.
Okay. Are you going to guess, Zoe, where this is going to go to?
Often, 100%.
No, it's not 100%. It's not 100%.
It's not.
Maybe it's more balanced in the end. Oh, it's a bit more balanced than I thought it was going to be. But,
Is it? Yeah. Oh, I'm biased.
I can see the results yet. So okay.
I'm biased because this is my world. I live in the world of meaning making.
All right. So we'll just give this another 10 seconds and then we'll close off the poll. So please complete if you can.
Yeah, that would be great to know.
Okay. All right. Okay. There we go.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yes. Excellent. Yeah, it does make a difference to how teams and individuals interact with things. So what can you do? Well, I'll come to the strategies after the next slide, just to show how this all knits together. One final piece of information, and then we'll talk about what to do and some strategies to deal with this. So next slide, Vinay, which is the last inform slide, which is how does this all knit together? So triangle of performance. Oh, sorry, the one after this. Thank you. System of performance, how this all knits together. So this triangle illustrates the visible behavior, which is the blue-black triangle at the top that we see when people are at work, and then beneath that black line is the not visible aspects of our behavior, which are our beliefs and values, which are the stories and meaning that we're making out of events and information. So we all have this at an individual level and a collective level. We have collective beliefs and values, collective stories and meaning, as well as individual. And the top triangle, the visible aspects, that's what we're focusing on. And I just wrote some notes here just to something that's not in the presentation that came to me. Focus from a leadership perspective is incredibly powerful. What you focus on as a leader will signpost, both visually and in all ways, it will signpost to your organization and your teams what matters the most. If you're having difficulty with teams prioritizing and focusing on what matters the most, what you focus on as a leader should role model that and cast that shadow of extreme precise focus. And then your physiology and your language has to be in alignment with that focus. So how your body reacts to when you're talking about what to focus on and prioritize, and the language and the words that you use. So Mark and I were talking before this webinar, and he was talking about economy in England, and he said some people are referring to it as being in a phase of stagnation. And I said, well, what difference would it make if we talked about it as being in the stage of stability? Like it's not moving, it's not going up, it's not going down, but the difference in those words, stagnation, downside, stability, sounds less concerning. Using transformational language as a leader, to slow down people's meaning making and comprehension of fear or risk, because we have a reticular activating system in our brain which is seeking for risk and danger. So if you use language that sounds risky, like the media do, or dangerous, it activates that and gets people into a state of, and you sometimes want them to be alert, but is that necessarily going to get you the sustainable performance that you're looking for? So looking at this system is really, really powerful as a leader, looking at how your performance culture is made up, what beliefs, values, meaning, and then what behavior you can see that's visible. We've got a poll to ask you. We have got a poll now, haven't we, Mark, about the visible?
Yes.
Visible? Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Do you want me to launch that? Okay, great.
Yes, please. So just interested in what is impacting your current decision making the most currently. So do you think it's the visible aspects of performance, which is what people are focusing on, the language that they're using, their physiology, or is it the invisible elements, which are the beliefs, the values that they carry, and the meaning that they're making? Really interested to hear your perspective on whether you think it's visible or invisible elements. And this is more of a self-reflection exercise rather than you telling us, like, this isn't data for me, this is you to go, actually, is it what I'm seeing that's the problem, or is it actually what's underneath what I'm seeing that might be causing some of these challenges that we're experiencing? Could it be that people's values are being compromised by some of the things that we're asking them to do? Could it be that they have beliefs about what's going on right now that are causing them to resist or react? Is it that there's too much meaning making going on, and do we need to really give people the tools to reduce that? Or is it the my leadership focus? Is it that I'm not focusing powerfully using my language on the right priorities? So just self-reflect on that and then let us know what you think.
Yeah. I'll keep the poll running for another 10 seconds or so. Okay. There we go.
Yeah, great. That's great. Just continue to self-reflect on that. And when you go back into work later, maybe your awareness might be a little bit heightened from what you've heard today. You might start thinking about, okay, well, what should I look for? Just notice today, over the course of today, maybe you might hear things slightly differently, or you might see things slightly differently. Just note it down. When we run these webinars, or when I do specifically coaching sessions with groups and teams on this, you get a sense of a new perspective, a sense of awareness that it's a window, it doesn't stick around for very long. So just notice after this webinar what you're noticing, and maybe jot it down so that you can capture the window that we might have opened in this conversation. Okay. Next slide, please, Vanessa. Again, just another very simple model. I'm all about simplicity. Often organizations call us in to work on their performance culture, and they're not in a stable environment. They're asking us to help them uplift their performance culture outside of stability. And from my experience, it is very, very, very challenging. And I don't want to say impossible, because nothing is impossible in the world of transformation, but it's very difficult to outperform and uplift performance culture when there's instability around leadership. So you'll see these orange boxes: instability around leadership, people, processes, material risks, and KPIs. If you've got instability in those 5 areas, it's really difficult for people to uplift their performance. Outperformance and performance uplift and achieving impossible targets that have never been achieved before are very much easier to achieve when you've got that stability around those 5 areas. So if you were to ask me, Zoe, what should I focus on first to help people with uncertainty, with the challenges? Stabilize as many of those 5 factors as you can, and that will help provide people with a sense of security and safety. It will reduce the noise in their minds, the mental load, and it'll help them focus on the things that matter the most.
Yeah. Okay.
Only change what you absolutely must change at the moment. There's a temptation for us to go into a frenetic state of change and try and, we don't know which thing is going to make the difference, so we'll launch 10 things. Try not to do that. Before I go into solutions, Mark, are there any questions that have come through for me?
Yeah, there's a number of questions and statements, so I'm just going to scroll through those. Okay, question here. Do you think that there is too much digital noise and people have become distracted by real meanings, I think is what that's saying.
Distracted by what, sorry?
Digital noise.
In terms of media?
I'm presuming so. Yeah.
So when we work with organisations on their meaning making, you'll notice in the circle of things that impact meaning making: consumption habits, consumption of media, consumption of information, consumption of that noise, that digital noise, very much impacts on people's performance. It very much impacts on the mental load. Now, the media is not designed to reassure us or put us into a sense of security or safety. It's designed to alert us to potential risk. That's what it was designed for way, way back. News was something that, you know, we needed lots of people to be aware of so that they could take appropriate action. Now it's become a little bit more than that, hasn't it? So we need to be mindful about protecting ourselves and our teams, what they're exposed to digitally. One-on-one clients that I work with, CEOs and executives, we put a consumption habits diary together and we look at what is it that you're consuming and what impact is that having on your meaning making, on your mental health, on your emotional state, on your decision making. It impacts hugely. So be very careful who you follow on Twitter.
If a key person has challenges themselves with going through the change curve, then this can cause a risk to the business. What are the options for managing this?
A key personnel.
Yes.
Yeah, right. So yeah, so therefore there's a risk. So that would link to this. That's a material risk right here on this slide. So that's a really relevant question. So first of all, how can you mitigate the risk of that person being a key person? So first thing, look at other people around, asking the question about the change curve. Have you got others who are in a state of higher resilience? And can they support that key person? But also at the same time, giving that person a coach, giving them some one-on-one time, asking them the questions that I'm going to give you in the context conversation tool that I'm going to share with you, and really making sure that, one, you address the risk, mitigate the risk as much as you can by spreading the dependency on that person, but then also giving that individual maximum support that they need. And often support isn't taking work away. I once had someone in one of my teams back in the day when I was leading teams in-house, and they said, the last thing that I need you to do right now is take responsibility away from me, because that will actually cause me to feel worse. So, you know, you've got to really be sensitive to what the individual needs to maintain their state, but also to then help them move through the change curve faster. And it's about asking them, again, leaders, please don't assume that you are responsible for other people and that you need to have the answer. It's about asking the right questions sensitively with empathy and getting them to also coach themselves out of the situation that they're in.
Yeah, they've got to understand that they're moving themselves along rather than you dragging them along.
100%, especially if someone's in one of those anger, depression, shock, denial states. Yeah.
Okay. Another statement, change may make certain employees disengaged, which leads to poor performance as well if not managed.
Yes.
Yeah. People are often loath to express their thoughts in case they are perceived to be weak and not coping.
Yes, absolutely correct. And this is very much linked to culture. And how, well, very much linked to culture and very much linked again to their meaning making and their past experiences and their beliefs that they have around what speaking up actually means. So first question to ask yourself as a leader, if this is happening, what am I doing to create, am I creating a culture of psychological safety and openness? If you're doing everything that you can to create that environment, then look at what they're currently experiencing from a meaning making perspective. So what past experiences have they had, or what beliefs might they have about what they're experiencing, and just have them share that. Just have them feel safe to share it without any fixing. There's a problem here. There's a technique that we use called, I wish I had more time, gosh, we could do a whole half a day on this, a technique called life positions. So I'm okay, you're okay. I always talk to my clients and anybody that I'm around in an equal, I'm okay, you're okay. If you talk to someone like I'm okay, you're not okay, you're putting them in a lower position of power. That has them feel unsafe. Or you're okay, I'm not okay, putting your own self into a position of lower power victim state. So always approach people in an I'm okay, you're okay. And you can even say that to them, look, there's nothing wrong here. This is not a conversation because there's anything wrong. This is just a conversation that I'm having with everybody to provide support because I know that we're going through a period of extreme change right now. And you depersonalize it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I will get onto the solutions if possible, because I know we've only got 6 minutes.
Okay, go for it. Yep.
Yeah. So we'll go on to the next slide, please, Vinay. It's the solution slide. And again, it's about reducing meaning making. The next one, please. Thank you. Reducing this meaning making. So open loops, identifying where people have open loops, and just remembering this image this image of what contributes to people's meaning making, it is none of that is external to them. So none of that is anything about the environment. That is all to do with their internal world. And so how do you get into their internal world, and how do you access that as a leader to be able to have the conversations that needs to be had? Well, that is the next slide. It says here, focus on wellness conversations and closing open loops. Now, if we go to the next slide, this is a very, very powerful, what we call context conversations. Context conversations are very much about nothing is wrong, there is nothing to fix here, it's just an open conversation. It's about listening powerfully, and it's about what I call inquiry. Now, people feel their nervous system responds to this technique incredibly well. You listen, you simply ask them an informal question. Tell me what's going on for you right now. Use the curve, like that one person said, if I presented people with this curve, how will they react? Present them with something outside of themselves to reflect on and say, look, at a collective level, maybe get the team to do this first before you go into one-to-one, so it's safer, so that people don't feel marginalized or singled out. What's going on right now? What's our current reality? What is it that we're experiencing? Once people start to feel safe to share that, you then go into a process, what's called inquiry. What is it like? What is it affecting? How does it feel? They're very open questions. They're non-threatening. They're not personal, but encouraging people to open up. If you do this in group setting initially, you'll have those people that feel safer speak up, and then the ones that don't speak will still self-reflect. They'll be in the conversation. It's just about creating the conversation. And then the point that really builds trust is recreation. So you then play back to the room what you heard. I heard that it feels like this. I heard that you're experiencing that. And when people feel heard and gotten like that, their defense mechanisms go down. They feel trust. They feel connection. They feel like they've been seen and they're being heard. And the final thing, which is the most important, which is the hardest point in this process, is acknowledge and do not fix. Now, we really want to fix. We want to give them a solution. We want to give them an answer. We want to take whatever bad experience they're having away. Do not do that in this moment. It will make them feel like you're putting them into that life position of they're not okay, and that will diminish the trust. Hold, I'm okay, you're okay, and just say, thanks for sharing, team. This has been a really useful conversation. We're going to continue to have these conversations because it's really important that we're feeling supported by one another. End of, that's the end of the conversation. Any questions on that? Because I'm aware that I've got 3. I'm such an integrous around time. No, so summary. Shall I summarize? Unless
yeah, we go. If you want to make a quick summary, we've still got plenty of questions, but I think we're not going to get through them all. There might be a couple more put in. So bring your summary together, and then I'll make a few statements.
Quick summary. So the majority of the challenges that you're experiencing are people's perception of what's going on around them and their capacity to deal with that. So help them understand their world, help people feel safe to talk about their experience that they're having in the workplace, create that environment of support, create that environment of performance, because teams support each other in this way. Have context conversations, look at the meaning making that's going on, and start to just elevate the awareness of your organization through this lens. It's emotional intelligence, it's elevating their awareness, it's elevating their ability to communicate what's the experience that they're having, so that you can actually get to the root cause of what's affecting performance and how people are responding to challenges and change.
Yeah, my follow on to that is exactly my takeaways from actually listening to some of this again, refreshing, but also some of it from a new point, first time in meaning making, getting that context. What actually happened versus what they've made it, or somebody's made it mean to them, and understanding that. And then even the final piece, which I think is really important, solutions, getting the context right, feedback to them what you feel, what you've heard from them, so they make sure they understand there's an empathy between you, that there's an understanding that you're on the same page. Because that's the battle. And I think someone's asked that question, how do you convince other people that that your reality is the correct one and not theirs? And sometimes that can only happen with that communication, that feedback loop, and that's the only way to do it. And acknowledge and do not fix. Okay, it's not your job to fix, it's your job to acknowledge. And that's one of the hardest things. I've been in situations where change has been there and people ask me plenty of questions. What do you feel about this? How do you, because they want you to, and sometimes you might be in their camp with some aspects of it, but you're administering something that has the bigger picture as this needs to be rolled out, and that's very difficult. So sometimes you can't solve everything. You've just got to give empathy and listen. Before we kick off, before we click off, a couple of quick things I wanted to bring up. I want to say thank you to Zoe. I think it's been fantastic feedback. We've got an offer for yourselves. If you would like us to run this webinar internally with your own organization or with any of your teams, or to put a group of people from your organization onto this webinar, a version of this, we can do this. And that's something we're very happy to do and facilitate and talk to you about. So I think if you've got a management team or a team of being affected by change, that's something that would suit us very well indeed. So Zoe and I are very happy to try and facilitate that if you want to reach out to us. We have an offer to join us on a round table on the 8th of March on a Wednesday morning. So if you want to follow up on this conversation in a more personalized environment where you can utilize your own examples, or we can answer some questions directly to you. And I know there's many questions we haven't got to answering today, then we can do that very much. So there's 3 ways to register for that. One, indicate in the questions box now. Just send us a question and say, I'd like to attend. Yeah, and we've picked that up on your name. Secondly, you'll be sent a feedback questionnaire at the end of this webinar. Just put in there's a question there, I'd like to attend. Or thirdly, email us directly, yeah, and express your interest. But that's going to be on roughly 9 o'clock again in the morning on Wednesday, the 8th of March. So it's a roundtable environment. As I said, you'll receive a questionnaire when you log off. Please do take the time to fill this in. It's very brief. There's a lot of it just scoring us, but it's also very positive feedback. Really important that we get that feedback from yourselves. There's materials in the webinar handout section, which at this point is some Savant. You'll certainly get some information sent to you about Luminary Mindset in due course. But thank you for taking the time to attend. It's been really positive, and there's actually such a big topic. I'd love to go on for hours. There are literally 30 questions. I don't know. Anyway, it's very busy. Thank you for your statements and your support. And do follow up with us individually. You've got the ability that you know how to contact us. So thank you very much for your time, everybody.